substantial portion of funding that comes from the provincial government. So the portion that's paid on the property tax bill is about $6 million. And on that average household that we're talking about, the one that's assessed at about $210,000, the annual cost is about $28 for all those services. In the area of children's care, we operate 5 child care centers and manage a system that provides care to over 6,000 children across Niagara. We also provide or support a number of outreach and community programs. Total budget for children's services is $31 million. Again, with parent fees and Province of Ontario funding, the net share that goes on the tax bill is about $7.5 million, or $35 per year for that average household. Social assistance, unfortunately, this is a growing business for us. Social assistance caseloads have increased by 32% since September of 2008, but we provide support to over 18,000 residents in Ontario. The total value of those services budget is about $108 million, and with funding from the Ontario government, it reduces the property tax portion to about $22.3 million, or about $106 for the average household. Hostels and homelessness, we provide hostel beds and support services to over 4,000 families who are at risk. The total budget for that service is $1.1 million. With federal and provincial funding, the net cost to Niagara is about $93,000, or 44 cents per household on an annual basis. Provincially operated programs or Ontario Disability Support. Many folks are surprised to learn that a service like this, a portion of which is paid for on the property tax bill. But we do provide services to about 15,000 residents a year who have either physical or intellectual disabilities. The province actually operates this program, and we cost share in it. The total value of that service is about $147 million. Niagara's share presently is $13.9 million, but the province is gradually assuming a larger portion of the funding for these services, and by 2011, the entire cost will be assumed by the Province of Ontario, so there'll be some relief provided as a result of that. In the area of public health, our Niagara Public Health Department provides a wide range of health programs to protect our residents, prevent illness, and promote healthy living. In the area of promotion, programs promote child development, healthy active living, healthy eating, immunization, early detection of cancer. In health prevention includes such things as tobacco and substance misuse programs, chronic disease prevention for things like diabetes and obesity. Our Think and Drive campaign, a road safety campaign, is also part of our public health department in partnership with others. And also there's education programs to help prevent infectious diseases. In the area of health protection, it's protection from disease and environmental hazards through an inspection program that we operate, our food inspection and food handler training, make sure that food in restaurants is safe. You may have taken advantage of one of our immunization clinics last year when we immunized over 157,000 residents against H1N1. So the total value of all of those public health services is $34.1 million. Again, with provincial subsidy, the net cost to us and the portion that appears on the tax bill is $6.7 million, or roughly $32 per household per year. Emergency medical services, or ambulance. We operate 30 vehicles from 17 stations across Niagara, responding to 72,000 calls per year through what we believe is a state-of-the-art dispatch center. The total cost of that service is just under $35 million. Again, with provincial subsidy, net share is $13.4 million, or $63 per average household. Our Integrated Community Planning Department is the department that helps us determine how and where we grow as a regional community. It includes our primary planning functions, along with other areas such as corporate communications and our clerk's office, and it's our clerk's office that's the conduit for the public to access regional council through submission requests or requests for delegation at our standing committees. The goal of our Integrated Community Planning Department is to integrate a multiplicity of plans and strategies really to support good decision making, decisions that give a balanced consideration to things like land use planning, our culture plan, infrastructure, economic development, and healthy active living. And our goal is to have a sustainable Niagara for the next 50 years. Total cost of those services is $6.2 million, about $29 per household. Leadership and governance, this budget includes the offices of the Regional Council, the Regional Chair and Chief Administrative Officer. The responsibilities include the executive oversight, leadership, and management of the organization in accordance with Council's long-term plan or four-year business plan. Total budget for that operation is $2.2 million, or just over $10 per household. Corporate Services is the department that supports the rest of the organization with services like information technology, legal services, human resources, budgeting, purchasing, and facilities management. We operate out of about 100 different facilities. 49 of those facilities are managed by our Corporate Services department. So their role is to manage the budget and manage our assets and our resources effectively so that we can deliver all of the other services that we're talking about tonight. There are some expenses that don't align exactly with our operating department mandates, and they include things like our contributions to significant community initiatives such as the Regional Cancer Center, Cardiac Center, the Brock Bioscience Center, so contributions to those types of things comes out of this budget. We also pay a portion of the provincial cost for property assessment across Ontario. Our share is about $5.6 million. Costs for our 911 system and other financial expenses such as our cash contributions to that capital budget that we talked about earlier. There's also revenues that we rely on other than property taxes and provincial funding and program fees through each of our service areas. The largest of which in this category is about $11.8 million in what we call payments in lieu of taxes. They're really taxes that are paid by the provincial and federal government on properties that they own and operate in Niagara. We don't have the authority to tax them, so they give us a grant or a payment in lieu of taxes. So the total amount there is about $21.4 million, and that reduces the tax requirement by about $100 per household. Public Works, these services are probably some of the easiest to identify, or the ones that are most visible to residents. Some of the more traditional services like roads, bridges, water and sewer treatment, garbage, recycling, those kinds of things. In the transportation division of that department, we cover a very large geographic area for a relatively small population base. Our transportation team has responsibility for over 17 lane kilometers of arterial roads, 180 bridge structures, traffic signals, and so on. And this is one of the service areas where we get minimal funding from the province. So almost the entire $38.1 million appears on the property tax bill, and the result is about $180 per household. Within Public Works, we have a development services group who are responsible for the development approval process. They handle over 1,000 applications a year for various development activities that have an impact on urban growth and the use of our major services or infrastructure. The total cost for development services is $784,000, or just under $4 per household. Waste management, this is a service that we all experience every week. In addition to garbage collection services, we operate landfill sites, recycling facilities. We dispose of or recycle over 200,000 tons of material and generate about $6 million of revenue on your behalf through the sale of recyclable materials every year. So the total value of that service is about $33 million. The average across the region is about $158 on an annual basis, or about $3 a week for all of the waste management and waste collection services that we provide. Water services. The Niagara region is responsible for the operation of water and sewer systems in Niagara, primarily the major treatment facilities, the trunk sewers, and the storage facilities. We have a two-tier structure here. We at the region are the wholesale operation for water and sewer treatment. We then wholesale those services to the area municipalities who build them out. It might be hard to visualize 59 billion liters of water treated annually, but that's equivalent to about 1,400 Welland Canal locks full of water, or 24,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. I don't know if that helps with the picture, but it's a lot of water. The total value of that service is about $42 million, and it's about $214 for the average household. And we're now into what we call the rate portion of our budget, so waste management services, water, sewer are what we call rate budgets. Wastewater services, wastewater or sewage treatment, again, we're the wholesaler providing that service to the area municipalities. It's actually a more costly service than water treatment and production, and again, our geography has an impact on that service and its costs. We cover a large area dissected by a canal and an escarpment, and we operate over 100 water treatment facilities, including pumping station facilities. So between water and wastewater, our residents own facilities and pipes that are worth over $2 billion. So there's a significant cost there, capital infrastructure cost, a significant cost to replace those systems. And in fact, out of all of the costs for water and wastewater, about 90% is capital in nature or a fixed cost in nature. So there's a very small variable portion of those services. Many folks are surprised to find that we operate provincial offences courts in Niagara, and we administer mostly traffic offences like speeding tickets. And this is one of the service areas where we actually, after costs, we make money. So there's some net revenue from this service, and we actually split that revenue 50-50 with the area municipalities. So the region's portion, the one-half portion of that revenue, is about $900,000 or $4.28 that comes off the tax bill requirement. So this next section of the presentation covers what we call our agencies, boards, and commissions. So they're separately governed bodies, but they're still funded through your regional tax dollars, and we have a relationship with those agencies, boards, and commissions. And the first one is Police Service. And like many of our services, the Niagara Regional Police supports a large geographic area bordered by major waterways and an international border. Police Service responds to over 131,000 calls per year. And although it might seem on the surface like a basic service, there's 91 different programs that are governed by provincially imposed adequacy standards. Oversight, as I mentioned, is through a separate body called the Niagara Police Services Board. And this is one of the services, like our Public Works Department, where there's a very little amount of outside support or funding from the provincial or federal governments. So it's almost entirely funded by your property tax, $121 million. The average cost to the average household is about $572. So if you compare that to something like social assistance, where it also had a similar cost, the cost was over about $108 million for social assistance. But the difference on the property tax bill is that a large portion of social assistance is funded by the province. So there's only about $100 per household is the cost for social assistance, but it's near $600 for policing services. The Conservation Authority, so a portion of your regional taxes goes towards watershed and water quality management through the NPCA. The watershed that they manage goes beyond the boundaries of Niagara, so there's a portion of the costs that are paid by Hamilton and Haldimand, but Niagara's share of that is $7.5 million, or sorry, total cost is $7.5 million. Niagara's share is $4.6 million, or just under $22 per household. Again, some are surprised to find that a portion of your regional taxes goes towards housing supports. We support some 17,000 tenants. We're also involved in the creation through Niagara Regional Housing of new affordable housing. Again, that's governed by a separate board. The total value of those services is just under $48 million, and after some federal and provincial funding, the net share is $25 million, the portion that's paid on the property tax bill, or about $118 per household. And finally, we have our Niagara Economic Development Corporation, which is the body that oversees our economic growth strategy and promotes and advocates for business and tourism growth and job creation throughout our region. So their net budget is about $2 million, and that translates into an average property tax bill of about $9.43 for that service. So in summary, this next slide attempts to show all of those services. Again, on that household worth about $210,000, how the cost of all of those services adds up to just under $1,500 per year. And I know it's a little bit hard to see on this, the overhead, but we have copies of that were available to you when you came in, and we have a larger version of that in the hallway outside. You can also, if you wish, to try to figure out what the actual regional property tax bill for your property is, we have on our website a tax calculator tool, so that if you know what your assessment is, you can plug it into that tool, and it can give you, on your particular property, what the regional taxes are for all of those services. So thanks for your patience. Hope that was helpful, and what I'll do now is turn it over to John, who will facilitate in an answer section tonight.
Thank you, Mike. I've never heard the regional compared to Neon. Or Angel and Angel Western user. No, it's not working. Really? Okay. So this, can you not hear me? Sorry. It is now. Thank you. All right. This portion of the evening is where we ask you, either online or in the room tonight, to pose a question to the people at the front. Keep in mind that these are largely senior staff people, although you're welcome to ask Mr. Partington a political question if you like. Don't be worried about tough questions. This is what we want tonight. We want to hear from you. This is the first of several different public consultations, so I'm looking for someone who's willing to be the very first speaker. Do I see a hand anywhere? It's a long mic. All right. If I could ask people to identify themselves, if you represent a group, what the group is, please.
I don't represent a group. My name is Wayne Darrowing, and I'd like to know who approves the police budget and what part the regional council plays in this.
Thank you. It's a massive part of the budget when you see the graph. So, Mike, why don't you direct that?
Maybe I'll start off, and then I can turn it over to either Deputy Chief Matthews or Mr. Fuentes to add to the response. But as we mentioned, the police service is governed by a separate body called the Police Services Board. And although they're funded through your regional property taxes, the Police Services Board, according to the provincial legislation, has the authority to give initial approval to a budget. So Police Services Board consider the needs based on all of those standards that need to be met throughout Niagara. They recommend a budget to Regional Council, but the ultimate approval for the police budget is with Regional Council. So I don't know, Joe or Guillermo, if you wish to add anything to that.
In regard to the Police Service Board, are they appointed or elected? Oh. In regard to the Police Services Board, are they appointed or elected?
There are 7 members of the Police Services Board, and it's a representation that's split between provincial appointments as well as regional appointments. So of the regional appointments, the region has 4 representatives on the Police Services Board. 3 of those must be elected representatives, so members of council, and 1 is a citizen at large appointed by Regional Council. And then the other 3 representatives of the board are appointed by the region, and they sit in terms that generally align with the municipal councils.
If I could just follow up on the police issue, because it's such a large portion of the budget, I don't understand why it's so expensive. Can you tell us why there's such large numbers in the budget? I think this would be interesting.
The biggest explanation for police services is that 92% of a police service budget is personnel. So it's direct delivery to the public. The rest of the budget, the 8%, is on our other assets such as vehicles, guns, equipment. So when you look at the way a police budget actually works, there are and the deputy can expand on that, adequacy standards. So regulations that are legislated coming from the provincial government that say if you have a police service, you must, and it's prescriptive, respond in this manner. Once that's done, that establishes for each one of the programs what type of personnel we must have. Once we know that, then each one of the programs is populated and it goes forward into a budget in front of our police services board. The second portion, and we hear a lot about that, is what's the salary settings. Now, most people are aware that the police service went through a large arbitration with the police association. We spent a considerable amount of time, almost 18 months, trying to get a collective agreement which was finally arbitrated. And the arbitrators tend to keep police services within the same envelope. For them, their perspective on that is a police, whether it's in Toronto, Niagara, Halton, Hamilton. So when you see that the police services are prescribed what level of service they have to deliver and a salary that's pretty much prescribed at an arbitration level. So that's fundamentally how you see a budget, police budget.
Thank you. We can come back to the police issue later on if we like. Let me just read a question that we got online. This is from Paul in Lincoln. It's a public health question, Dr. Williams. How do you justify spending taxpayer money on managers in a ratio of 1 to 7, one manager for every 7 employees? At my company, I have one manager for every 53 employees. Are you trying to tell the public that you do not trust your 7 nurses, so they must be supervised by a manager? How can one manager supervise 14 nurses and therefore eliminate a management position? So I don't know whether that's Dr. Williams or someone on the fiscal side.
I'm happy to try and answer that. We are constantly reviewing the models of care in the ways in which we provide our public health services to the region. And we benchmark ourselves, we compare ourselves to other public health departments across the country as well as across the province. It is variable from different aspects of the public sector to the private sector. As we benchmark Niagara against other health departments, in fact, our ratios are lighter. If we look, for example, to Hamilton's ratios, we have a legislated and accountability frameworks. We have a high number of professionals. We have a lot of students, volunteers that are all figured into our ratios of, on average, about one manager for 13. On the EMS side of the equation, we have one manager supervisor for about 11.5 paramedics, and those are pretty standard ratios. So this is something that we're constantly reviewing and renewing, looking at models of care, ways to do things differently, less expensive, and it certainly has nothing to do with trust. I'm not sure where that's coming from. I mean, we have absolutely wonderful frontline staff that, so I don't know if...
Thank you. Another question from the floor. Here we go. Your name, please.
Yvon Doucette, Port Colborne. With the fact that the emergency wards have been shut down in the south end of this province, and EMS has to run a much longer distance to get a patient to emergency if it's absolutely necessary, has there been any thought in the type of paramedics that are on the ambulances on the south end? And I believe they're called P3s, which is the highest level of paramedics that exist. Should they not be on those ambulances at the south end, since they have that much further to drive, especially with a critically ill patient?
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We have different levels of capacity of our paramedics, And we've been fortunate here in Niagara, both by the vision of our leaders and also, frankly, by the support of Regional Council, that we've been able to have a support of 65% of the highest level acute care paramedics. And we run the ambulance system as a system. So we don't carve off, south, north, east, west. We try to ensure that our response times across the whole system are the safest and best they can be. And again, we have standards depending on what the issue is. So someone with a broken arm may need to wait a little bit later or longer than someone who has an acute cardiac event. We do and have made significant adjustments in response to the changes of the NHS system, the Niagara Hospital system. And again, I think we've had terrific support from the Board of Health and Regional Council with an increased infusion of $3.1 million and upstaffing to try to maintain our response times, both with the closure and transition of emergency departments and also because of really challenging situations with offload delays. So in general, I think we have managed the system very well. We've got good response times, which we report quarterly to the Board of Health to try to accommodate those changes that have been made in other systems, i.e. the NHS system.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Williams, what you're telling us is that in the South, the distance traveled and the time that it takes to get to the emergency if you are having a heart attack is exactly the same from the South, and let's say Port Colborne, is from anywhere else within the region. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that as a system, we have target times that we are work very hard and obligated to have. And someone with a cardiac event is prioritized at the top. We move the whole system around, whether the cardiac event is in Niagara or Waynfleet or Lincoln. We constantly are monitoring and moving the vehicles around so we can maintain those appropriate response times for the degree of care that the person requires. So we have made substantive investments, as I said before, in response to the changes that have happened on the NHS side of the equation, and we have been able to maintain response times. The time on task, you're absolutely right, is longer. It is farther now for us to, but again, we have upstaffed, we have moved vehicles closer so that we are able to provide the best care possible across the region through the whole system, through tweaks and adjustments and constant movement depending on where the call volumes are, et cetera. And we've been able to do that partly because of the $3.1 billion investment. We've been able to increase the vehicles, partly because of the 65% of our paramedics that are the acute care paramedics. And so the system, the EMS dispatch system is running, I think, very well.
We can come back to any of these issues as the evening progresses, but let me read another online question. We hear this from time to time. What's the total number of employees at Niagara on the regional payroll? How many were there 10 years ago? And how many employees make over $100,000?
I'll start off. Brian, have you got that information available?
So the total number of employees on the regional payroll in 2009, if we want to do last year ended, was 3,367. The total amount of employees in the year 2000 was 2,641. So juxtaposing those 2 years between 2000 and 2009. The payroll salary disclosure list, in 2000, there was 15 employees making over $100,000 a year. And in 2009, there was 246 employees.
All right. Another question from the audience? Please.
My name is Harold Arp. I have no objection to the Niagara region, but my complaint is a duplication of services. It needs to stop because I think we're paying twice for everything.
I think there might be a sense that you're paying twice for everything. For example, we have a two-tier structure for water and wastewater treatment. We have a two-tier structure for, there's even economic development activities that take place at the regional level as well as at the local level. To say that there are complete duplication and there's overlap, we don't believe that's the case. I think there's a division of responsibility in each one of those areas. For example, our role in water and wastewater, as I mentioned, is the treatment plant or wholesaling operation, the major trunk mains, the storage facilities. At the local level, the responsibility is for the distribution system, and they manage that distribution system. So there is that separation, although it's a two-tier structure, there's a separation.
If I may, it's not just the water. You hear people complaining about roads. They don't know who to call about the roads or anything else like this. I mean, it needs to be made more public or do it all, everybody does their own thing. I mean, it's just getting ridiculous. You talk to somebody, I do school crossing in the corner of Lakeshore Road. I've had a lot of seniors complaining about the area that they have to cross. Who do you call? Nobody comes out and does anything. You mention it to your regional network. No, that's city. Did you mention it to city? No, that's region. I mean, this is getting ridiculous.
Thank you. Here's another online question. I don't know who wants to take this. How could realigning services between the Niagara region and the local area municipalities save taxpayers money? Let me just interpret some of that. We do have planning departments in different communities and at the region. We have public works in some municipalities and at the region. Is there a way of saving some money?
I'll take a first crack at that. In terms of realignment, I think we've taken a look at some of those services. For example, in partnership with our area municipalities, we looked at the planning function to try to rationalize that. We've done a review in the last year of economic development. And although there's activities that take place at the local level, as well as a role that's played at the regional level through NEDC, we found that there was no overlap. They were complementary services. So we know for in fact that amalgamation and consolidation has taken place in other jurisdictions. And I think what you find in most cases, if it's done solely for the reason of cost, the jury's still out in terms of whether it's a good thing. I think there's pluses and minuses to that. Primarily, the reduction in cost is in the areas of administration. So, to the extent that there's administration in both. But all of the services that are provided are still necessary after, a consolidation or a realignment. And in many cases, what they've found is that there's a sort of a gravitation to a common level of service as a result of that sometimes negates the savings that are achieved. But we constantly look at opportunities for realigning services, and we try to work in concert with the area municipalities.
Patrick?
Thank you, John. There's another aspect to reviewing services as well, and that is how do we improve service. So when we look at the planning function itself, we have started to realize savings in terms of being able to create, for example, model policies for municipalities so they don't have to redo them themselves and create some consistency for the public. But it's also turnaround times for applications, review periods, and really improving the service and the clarity that's required. So when we do look at potential duplication, we also have to look at what are the objectives. Savings is one, but also improving service.
Thank you. Question from the floor? Oh, I'm sorry. Peter? Go ahead.
What if I comment on that? Because I do think, to a large degree, the duplication is more perception than real, although there is some. But one of the areas that I think we as a region could look at with our area municipalities and making sure that water and wastewater can be delivered by one delivery system. A watertight report a few years ago to the province recommended that the region of Niagara deliver water and wastewater in Niagara. That hasn't been acted on by the province or by anyone else. A study done many years earlier suggested, when we first looked at governance, there could be savings of up to $4 million a year if there was one delivery system. That would be much greater now. That's something that needs to be looked at. But in the area of duplication of services, I think people look at regional vehicles around traffic lights when traffic lights are maintained. All of the traffic lights in the region of Niagara that are municipal, whether they're city, town, village, or region, are maintained by the region of Niagara. So if one looked at that, you'd say there's a duplication, but it isn't. The region does those services, and in doing so provides good service, provides it most efficiently.
Thank you, Peter. Question back here.
Becky A. Thorold. I'm wondering what the NEDC does to help the individual municipalities with economic development.
Well, the NEDC is actually an organization that is more for marketing the region relative to industry, economic development opportunities abroad, for example, in the emerging clusters, things of that nature. Thorold is actually really right now experiencing a positive outcome from one of our websites. We've got microsites that are being developed for the 7 municipalities. They're going through our initial regional website and your actual local website. So there are a number of things. If you think about the emerging clusters being in the product lines that include solar, wind, things of that nature, we're visiting abroad. We're marketing, got Val Coons out there visiting abroad, trying to attract people to the area to come and see what we have. We have on our website, we have site selection opportunities people can check into. There's a number of things, I guess, that we do that probably you don't see on a daily basis. So I think I'd encourage you to join us. I don't know if the answer is good enough for you, but for me, I think the economic development process is one where you have to get yourself in front of customer. We do that. You bring the customer here. We entertain them through the point of showing them what we have from a facility site selection, and then we bring it to you as a municipality. Thorold doesn't have economic development officer, so we end up doing things like, for example, recently, Abitibi has been going through trouble. I've visited Abitibi, Mr. Gord Cole. There's business retention opportunity there because there's something like 120 employees not working as a result of having one of the machines down. So we've spent some time going through the Niagara Regional Waste Facility, trying to find ways to enhance the product of the fiber that goes to that particular site. We've talked to the independent electric system operator, trying to work on helping them reduce the energy cost. They have a competitive disadvantage of 2 cents a kilowatt hour. I don't know if you're aware of that. But in that regard, if we go through the IESO and we work with them to try and encourage an improved energy position, then that can make them more competitive. They've got an inside the fence problem relative to their neighbor with Northland Power. And the inside the fence problem is that the government of Ontario has decided that they will not allow them a debt recovery exemption on certain costs. And as a result of that, they will pay more money. And the whole idea of the Northland Power thing, the cogen thing, was to try and get them to reduce that cost. So we've worked with them in trying to lobby certain government officials to make that a possible result of positive. So on a business retention opportunity, I think we've seen some examples where the NEDC has gone forward and done a good job. On the marketing perspective, which is investment marketing, we go abroad and we sell the region as one region. There are municipalities have EDOs. The EDOs work with us as we bring contacts to the region, and we transfer them to the EDO to try and get a closure on a deal. So in total, I'd say that there's a lot of things that go on in there that cost money, but the reality is you need to see them probably close up, and I need to do a better job of getting that message out there as to what we do to deliver for the region.
Thank you. Did you want a follow-up question? Here's another question, and this is a word that's used by so many people, and there's so many different interpretations. What is the region doing to ensure we will be a sustainable community in the future?
That's an excellent question, and thank you for it. Actually, there's a number of things that we're doing. Not only does our council operate on the business plan, which was in the presentation previously, which really gives us some guidance, so beyond our legislative responsibilities, but also canvassing and getting very clear directions from the community as to what the issues are important that will actually make Niagara continue to be the place that they want to live in. So now, if I had said 5 years ago we'd be working on issues like climate change and culture and the food agenda, I would have surprised myself by saying that. But here we are responding to that. And in fact, we're also working more broadly on a long-term sustainability plan that's a 50-year time horizon. There are requirements that through things like qualifying for gas tax in Ontario that say you have to do a sustainability plan. I would like to believe, and in fact I can attest, that we're going well beyond the minimum standard for that. And the biggest driver is in fact the community that says they want it, and that's the response that comes through council, and as staff we work on that with them.
Thank you. Question from the audience. Over here. Name, please.
Thanks, John. Andy Petrowski, St. Catharines. I want to address this to Mr. Trojan, a subject near and dear to my heart and near and dear to the voters probably across Niagara region. That's water. In your slides on water and wastewater, you had indicated a certain statistic regarding the true cost of water. I think it's an understatement to suggest that the public, by and large, in Niagara feels deceived by what's happened with regard to water billing. Notwithstanding that industry has basically collapsed in some areas and the demand for water from business has fallen to such a point that in each municipality, like St. Catharines, for example, we're at half the rate of water consumption that we were 10, 15 years ago when GM was humming and the paper plants were humming. But people responded to a call to conserve, and over the last 10 years, water consumption has dropped even at the residential level by as much as 40%. In spite of that, our water bills have raised by almost double. Now, the truth is, and you spoke to this number, the true cost of water is about 80 to 90% fixed. And yet on our water bills, and yet prescribed by this Niagara region, you are asking municipalities to bill us almost the reverse, which is 75% variable, which is the water we use, and only 25% fixed. Is the region prepared to tell the truth to the public and ask us to pay what the true costs of water are, which is 90% fixed and about 10% variable? The truth is that we live in the middle of the world's largest source of fresh water, and that we're paying more and more when we're using less and less is criminal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you. We understand the frustration with the fact that conservation is in some cases not resulting in a reduced cost for water. As we mentioned, and I don't think it's a matter of truth, I think it's a matter of a better education and understanding the facts. And the facts are that a large portion of the costs for delivering water and wastewater services are fixed costs. There's a variable portion, but it's relatively small. We've had discussions at the council level, and there's been reports that suggest that the percentage between variable and fixed costs could be adjusted. I think some of the impact there is the impact that would be felt at the local level by the area municipalities by moving suddenly off of our present system to a revised system. So I think it's something that council will probably want to revisit during its new term, to take a look again at the fixed variable portions for water. But unfortunately, such a large portion is fixed because of the infrastructure system and the value of that system. I don't know whether Ken Brothers wants to add anything to that or not.
Thank you, Mike. You're quite right. The cost primarily is fixed for water. It's in the order of about 90%. From the wastewater operations aspect, that fixed cost is about 70%. And the bills are, the staff has brought forward options of a higher fixed cost component for that very reason. Council has debated this at length over the past number of years, where we've talked about this very issue. And there's a vulnerability, frankly, if we sell less water, we don't get the revenues to pay for the operating costs. Council has certainly struggled, I think, with the apportionment of a fixed cost and a variable cost component as it relates to the services we provide to area municipalities on a wholesale basis, and what the customer sees in terms of their bills at the local level. perhaps we could save the discussion about rates at upper tier and lower tier for another day, and we are having a waste and water open house next Wednesday. It's an open house where we'd be happy to have some further discussions on that. But certainly I think this debate will continue. I don't believe Council has finally landed on the end game in terms of the proper apportionment of fixed and variable costs. Certainly with having a high variable amount for water, there's risk associated with that, and particularly where you have a particularly wet year, we don't sell a lot of water and we become very vulnerable. We've lost millions of dollars over the last 5 years as a result of weather and reduced consumption, which frankly is happening across Ontario. This makes us that much more vulnerable, and I believe that there's an appetite for Council to further delve into the appropriate rate structures as we move forward, and frankly from a staff perspective we look forward to those discussions with Council.
Andy, a supplemental?
I just want to add, and I'm happy about that. The people of Niagara don't pay a sidewalk bill, they don't pay a roads bill, and they shouldn't have to pay for a fixed cost water bill. So I look forward to this Council revisiting that and giving the people of Niagara the true bill.
And Andy Petrowski is coming on to Regional Council. Mike, give us just a sense of timing. When does the new council take office?
The inaugural meeting of the new council is December the 9th. So that's when the new members of council will be sworn in and the new regional chairman elected or chairperson elected. Following that, there's actually a council meeting, first meeting in December on the 16th. And then in January, we'll start our regular cycle of committee meetings and council meetings.
Good. Here's another online question. What is the region doing to keep young, or I would say any professionals in Niagara? Patrick?
I'll take the initial swipe. Of course, again, we tie things back to the Council's business plan where youth retention and attraction is one of the objectives. One of the things that we've been doing, and I think been having great success as of late, is engaging young people through co-op programs, bringing them in, participating in whether it's policy work, as well as using the tools from a communication standpoint, social media, the Facebooks, the Twitters, making sure that we're reaching out to a population not only that is going to be here, we want them to be here, and we're planning for, they're the ones that are going to be living here in future, but also making sure that they're being heard, and that's really important, and responding to things that are important to them. So bring them in, introduce them to some of the work opportunities, working with the college and the university rather extensively, much more now than ever before, and what we're finding is the young folks are turning it to the region saying, we didn't realize that the opportunity that the region represents and our ability to contribute to the future of Niagara.
Thank you. Anyone else, Brian?
Just a supplemental, John, just to add to what Patrick said, some numbers. We have over 118 paid work experience for students in the Niagara region, which include internships, co-op placements, summer and mid-year students. We also provide a number of unpaid placements. We partner with local schools on their curriculums by participating in program advisory committees. We have career events, we have mock interviews, and people speaking at youth engagements in the schools, and participate and take your kids to work day as well. So many placements, as Patrick said, and try to support that and retain our youth in Niagara after they graduate.
John, and I think in addition to that, it's not only one of the objectives in Council's business plan. I think it's one of the objectives in the Niagara Workforce Plan. We work in partnership with the Workforce Planning Board, and Council has dedicated funds for a website that will not attract just youth and students, but young professionals, make it easier for young professionals to locate in Niagara.
Here's a question via Twitter. Some people think Twitter is great. Some people think it's overrated. We'll see in about 10 years. But here's the question. And I've forgotten about this, the current status. What is the status of the Mid-Peninsula Corridor? Patrick, again? Come on.
Perhaps just if I could preface it with a bit of a history lesson, the Regional Policy Plan has identified a mid-peninsula transportation solution since 1974. Since that time, there have been a number of initiatives, particularly at the provincial level, that have looked at along with our growth strategy, and actually this ties into some other land use directions, but what might be the way in which we can promote some of the growth, take advantage of some of the locational benefits of the South, and that includes, of course, some transportation infrastructure. Most recently, through the Ministry of Transportation, they have been going through an environmental assessment. What we do understand is that the initial recommendation is that they don't believe that we're ready for at least a road component. They are looking at multimodal. I would also point out that we do have existing infrastructure, rail infrastructure and marine infrastructure that we still have to work towards. Nonetheless, Regional Council recently made its voice very clear through the chairman that back to the Ministry of Transportation that we don't believe that they're taking into account a number of important factors, including the appropriate growth for Niagara, which of course is also Ontario's growth. I don't know, the chairman may want to add.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I might add, we of course partnered with the City of Hamilton through our Economic Development Corporation a few years ago. Spent $200,000 on a study which confirmed the necessity to build that corridor, which would include a four-lane non-access highway. The draft plan that's out there, it's a draft that's going to be presented to the province, basically says work with the region to build a connection from the 406 to the Queen Elizabeth Highway, somewhere between Niagara Falls and Fort Erie, do some work around Hamilton, but then put on hold for the next 20 to 30 years the connector between sort of south central Niagara, Welland, Port Colborne, and Hamilton. In the meantime, if to address the traffic increases, which will come, the province is talking about 4 million more people in Toronto in the next 20 years. If it's needed, we'll put 4 lanes on either side of the Queen Elizabeth Highway. But then they'll stop those lanes at St. Catharines. So 2 things happen: you kiss goodbye to the Greenbelt, and you guarantee you're going to have a moving parking lot in the near future, because those 4 lanes will go to 3 at St. Catharines. So we believe strongly. The City of Hamilton has passed a motion supporting it. The Southern Ontario Gateway. There's so many people that strongly believe the province needs to move on that. How they do it, they certainly can't put it on a shelf for 20 years. They may need to stage it a little bit more, and that's fine. But we're hoping that they will look at that draft report and make some significant changes to it to reflect what they're hearing from a lot of municipalities and a lot of organizations.
Thank you. I go to Toronto a lot. I've not taken my car in a long time. Can you give us an update on GO Train?
I guess I can start with that one. Of course, the province itself did some experimentation, and what was interesting in the Niagara experiment was it was not seen as so much commuter as it was visitor. So they did the weekend service, and they found that to be, quite frankly, wildly successful. And so they have now moved forward, and we've myself and Commissioner Brothers are part of an advisory group at the municipal level where they are now looking at extension of service. We do have, of course, some buses is coming in, but they do have on their list, in their priority list, a Stony Creek to St. Catharines extension. The one challenge is they appear to wish to stop at St. Catharines because of some scheduling challenges with the Welland Canal. We're working with them and negotiating that, because we believe that in order to be properly successful through Niagara, the link should come all the way to Niagara Falls.
Thank you. Question from the audience back here.
Walter Senzik, St. Catharines Thorold Chamber of Commerce. Just want to come back here. Just want to first compliment the region for hosting this tonight. The Chamber has worked closely with the region over the past number of years, and it's always difficult to understand the budget, but I want to bring it back to the taxes. Can you explain the uploading of social service to the province and the impact on the regional budget moving forward? Because from our understanding, and we've been looking at it for a couple of years, is that there is a gain to the region, and then there's also the lower tier. And how does that revenue be realized at the lower tier? Is it going to be realized at the lower tier? And if not, how will the region prevent, or if it's using it to offset taxes currently, keeping the tax rate low, how will it prevent in 10 years from having double-digit increases?
I'll start off with that one. What's happening and what's been happening for the last couple of years is a result of what's been called the Provincial Municipal Fiscal and Service Delivery Review. So that was a partnership between the province and the municipal sector to determine is there a better way to fund essentially many of the services that a decade ago were transferred to municipalities. Many of the services were ones that we felt, and the province agreed, were better funded from other than the property tax base. So services like Ontario Disability Support, social assistance, which are more income redistribution programs, are being gradually removed from our share of the tax bill. So there is some relief, and to be very candid, it was because of that relief that we've been able to have some of the success that we've had with keeping tax rates below inflation, below the average income growth, and averaging about 1% a year. On the other side of the equation, we have a significant shortfall or gap for infrastructure in Niagara. We've forecast the need for capital infrastructure over the next 10 years to be something in the range of $1.6 billion. In terms of affordability, if we're to try to keep the tax affordability plan in place and use that funding to support capital needs, we're about $500 million short over that $10 million, that 10-year period. So some of the strategy has been to transfer that relief from the removal of those social costs from the property tax bill, convert those dollars into dollars that will help us address that infrastructure gap. And that's only the infrastructure gap that exists at the regional level for regional services. You mentioned that there's as much of a need at the local level, and I think our strategy to assist the area municipalities is to give them some predictability to the tax increases over time through our affordability strategy. It doesn't give them huge capacity to increase costs, but at least there's some predictability to that. And given that we're about half of the overall property tax bill, to the extent that we can manage it, there's some relief for property taxpayers. What the future holds over the next 10-year period, I think there's still ongoing discussions necessary with the province, because we're not alone. The infrastructure gap that we're facing is not unique to Niagara. It exists across the province. And we know the province has their own fiscal problems, but there's a need to have further discussions.
All right, here's a question from West Lincoln. We hear stories about chickens in urban areas. Why are you allowing industrial wind turbines to be installed in West Lincoln? We know they cause issues with property values, wildlife, and residential health.
The short answer is that the responsibility for approving wind generation facilities was lifted by the province from municipalities under the Green Energy Act. They have an approvals process that they go through, and in fact, much to our chagrin, quite frankly, they bypass municipal decision-making process. So there may be a perception that we are otherwise allowing them, and while indeed the regional council early in the previous term did approve some wind energy policies, those were which we felt were much more based on public engagement and the types of expectations that the community should be able to have when making these types of decisions. All of that was lifted from us by way of the Green Energy Act.
Thank you. So we'll get some other people.
Yeah, Keith Gibbons, St. Catharines. My question is directed to whoever is on the regional council now, and I'm challenging the new council to do something about this police budget. It was mentioned earlier, it's the biggest thing on the whole budget, and we're being overloaded with cost. Why hasn't the previous council, or the council now, why haven't they pursued contracting this out to the OPP? It was talked about a few years ago, and nothing was done about it. And it's a foregone conclusion in our society that most municipalities save a lot of money by contracting out their services. And this could be contracted out to the OPP cheaper than it's done here. Holland and Norfolk contracted out their services in the year 2000 and saved a lot of money. And I believe Chatham-Kent went the same way, as well as several other municipalities. And this region is doing nothing towards getting this contracted out. They wouldn't have all these problems with the police and headquarters and all the rest of it.
Thank you. Peter?
I guess two things. I think the question of police costs and the responsibilities was explained quite well by the deputy chief and Wendy's earlier. The issue of contracting the issue of contracting out the service to some other service. I mean, I think it's a true statement that if you're looking at costs, usually the cost of services is led by the OPP. They don't follow it, as I understand it, for this year. But the fact is, we have an excellent service in Niagara. We have a facility in there, and it would be far more expensive to try and replace what is a very significant operating force with something different. So council believes, and I certainly believe, that it would be absolutely the wrong thing to do to even look at that. I think we have what we need to do is work with the police service and work with the chief and the board, and work with our municipal partners to make sure that going forward, the cost of policing, like the cost of much of what we do, is done in a fair and equitable way, not only for the members of the police services, but for the members of the public generally. So that's my comment.
So you don't want to contract out?
No.
Police?
But then, excuse me, all of that would be for a decision of the next council to deal with. But this council, I believe, has dealt with it earlier on, and the decision it made was that was not a doable option. But the next council and the one after it can do with whatever issue they want to deal with. It's entirely up to them.
Well, I'm sorry, I disagree with you, because Holland Norfolk saved money, and so did Chatham-Kent. So I think you're a little off mark, Peter.
I'm not aware of those, but appreciate your comment.
Thank you. Yes, please, Joe.
Perhaps I can shed some light and just help the gentleman. You're very correct in the fact that the Ontario Provincial Police in the last number of years have moved into areas and on a contract basis provided policing to a number of municipalities. They tend to be more rural municipalities. The budget that's developed for the police service and approved by our board and ultimately by regional council is developed on the basis that it has to provide for adequate and effective policing. If that would be the same threshold that the Ontario Provincial Police would have to meet when they provide policing. Policing is a municipal responsibility, so when the Ontario Provincial Police go into a municipality, they report to the board and the municipality on a contract basis. The adequacy standards that you heard about provide that every service, no matter where you are in the province, has to provide a number of things. And I'll use a common one that people are very familiar with for an example. Our emergency task unit, or our SWAT unit. The adequacy standard says if you have an emergency task unit, it has to have X number of people, they have to train X number of hours, they have to meet these standards. In smaller municipalities, they can't meet those standards because they don't have the number of officers, so they might decide to contract out to the Ontario Provincial Police. So in areas in southwestern Ontario, for instance, that SWAT response might come from London. It might come from a larger center. The Ontario Provincial Police, I don't believe, quite frankly, has any interest in moving into policing a region of this size. We are one of the 12 largest police services in the province. It's just a different type of policing, and so where the OPP have moved in, it's generally been in the smaller areas and gotten rid of some services that were 2 or 3 or 10 or 12 members. When you're talking a service like ours of 1,000 members, it's a different kettle of fish altogether. But the fact remains, whoever polices any municipality has to meet the same standard, that is adequate and effective policing, and that is how the budget is developed.
I would like to add one more point, and kind of from the beginning where I've mentioned that part of it is driven by adequacy, part of it is driven by arbitrators that have awarded large salary settlements. We need to realize that the provincial police is one of the drivers. It always has been. It saddles in the top 2-3 salary structures in the province. It never goes past number 3 in salary, and it generally sits at number 1 in exchanges between themselves and Toronto. So, and that would mean that it would apply that salary structure to any place that it polices. So the thought that it generally saves money is not consistent with the salary structures that are there.
Let's clear. I think there is some misconception about who makes budget decisions for the regional police. Is it not true that if the police go to the region for proposed budget and the region turns it back, that the region loses control over that?
The budget process is that the budget first is developed by the Police Services Board. They are, and this may go to the gentleman's questions earlier, the Police Services Board is by design not a political body. It's an arm's length body. They are appointed by the province, and some by the province and some by the region, but they have no role in operational policing, so they develop the budget. They are the body that is ultimately responsible for the provision of this adequate and effective policing, so they set the budget based on meeting that standard. They then send the budget to the region. Now, the region also has a responsibility to the taxpayer and for the provision of policing, but when the region gets the budget, they don't get a line-by-line budget. They get a higher level budget, and again, that's by design because the regional council is a political body. So that the region can either accept that budget or send it back. If the region were to not accept it and send it back to the Police Services Board, the Police Services Board can make adjustments, which quite frankly happens quite often. If they can't reach an agreement, then it goes to the Ontario Civilian Police Commission, who sits as an arbitrator, and that's the situation that we reached recently with the capital budget over the facilities, and it was ultimately averted by the region, by the board, and the region working cooperatively together in the interest of the taxpayers and in the interest of the provision of police services to reach an agreement. I don't know when the last time that we reached an arbitrator in Niagara was. It's many years ago. So generally these things can be worked out because there's a shared responsibility for the provision of police services.
Thank you. Let's go to the issue of transit. Chair Partington, this has been something very important to you. Here's a question from Niagara Falls. Why do we need a regional transit system when city transit systems are barely being used?
Perhaps if I get Peter. I think there's a combination of reasons. First of all, it's become very clear to us that we need to have intermunicipal transit for students to get to their schools. I mean, it's mainly Brock University students and Niagara College students. People live throughout the region, and a transit system works for that. But it's also economic development. It's an economic driver. There are many people who work in the hospitality industry, for example, in the city of Niagara Falls and in the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Many of them do not have cars. An active transit system would assist in that way. Clearly, there's also a social element to it. A transit system enables people to move back and forth for social reasons, for shopping, for commerce. And then, of course, another one going further down is an environmental need, is to the extent that we grow our population base, transit works better, especially between the three communities. Jurisdiction for intermunicipal transit, or for transit, rests at the local level. With respect to the specialized transit service that the region operates, that was done with a triple majority, a majority of the regional councillors, with a majority of the area municipalities having a majority of the voters. So that worked. But with respect to transit for commerce, for economic development, for the betterment of our community, that service rests, the jurisdiction rests with the area municipalities. And there are three major providers: Welland, St. Catharines, and Niagara Falls. And as we tried to move forward to come up with a more integrated transit system, like anything, when you change, sometimes there's resistance for very legitimate reasons, but sometimes it just takes a long time or longer to work it out. But we've made much progress. And I think the progress we've made to date is that the Niagara Regional Council agreed to put, for 2011, $3,700,000 into capital so that this enhanced system, because there already is a transit system of sorts within the region, quite a considerable one. But this will enable it to, the $3.7 million for capital, $1.9 million, I believe, for operations. So the region's input is to provide funding so that this intermunicipal transit system can grow under the operational control of the three current providers. And I believe that there's a reporting mechanism back to the region. Maybe Mike can talk about that. So I think we are making advances. There's some that think that that's a good first step, but beyond that, there should be maybe like a utility, one system, one transit system that delivers it all. That may or may not happen. But to the extent that we move to the degree we have, I think is very important for the economy and for service to the people of Niagara. And hopefully this is just a start, and that the transit systems will build on that. But we have, as the Regional Council, no legislative jurisdiction to run an intermunicipal transit system ourselves.
Thank you. Mike, anything? Yeah, just to add, as the chairman mentioned, that we will get ridership information from the three service providers that we're contracting with to provide those intermunicipal links, and council's approved it based on it being treated as a pilot. In other words, see how this works over the next 3 to 5 years and make adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Question? Anyone? Anyone else? I mean, we'll get to you if we have time, but we want to give everyone a shot.
Brian Beatty, Pelham. This chart is very helpful for the public in terms of seeing dollar figures for exact services. Like $156 for garbage sounds to me like a pretty good deal. But how do we know we're getting the bang for the buck? Do we compare our numbers to other communities? And if so, how does the public access that comparator?
I can start with that one. We do. We participate in a group that's called OMBI, the Ontario Municipal Benchmarking Initiative. It's the large 16 regional and single-tier municipalities across Ontario. And what we do is we look at each of our service areas, and we've identified, I believe, 40 different service areas. And we try to measure efficiency, in other words, cost per unit of service delivered. We try to measure quality as well. So that information is compared on an annual basis. We're also obliged by the province of Ontario to report on a number of service areas, the municipal reporting system. So that also gives us information to compare how we're doing in relation to other municipalities. And we find, I think that's good information for us. We try to use it in our budgeting system. It's information that council can use when making decisions about budget or service levels. And it gives us an indication of where we might have some opportunities. I think it's an indicator. If we see that we're not in what they call the performance zone in terms of low cost, high quality, it allows us to dig deeper and see what the reasons are for those municipalities that are in the performance zone. But many of our services are in that performance zone, and other municipalities come to us to see how we're doing it. There's some things about geography in Niagara that prevent our costs from being as low as we would like them to be. Water, wastewater, for example. We have a large geographic area, multiple urban areas that need to be serviced, so those kinds of services become more costly.
Is that OMBI report available here at the region, or does a person have the capability of getting on the website?
I don't know if we have it. Is it? But not on our website. Is there a link to our? Yeah, it's ombi.ca, so folks can access the public report. And then we as well do an annual report to council, taking our information and reporting it back to council.
Here's a question from Pelham from the web. Will the regional municipality of Niagara have any say on the new tourism partnership in Niagara? Who's watching out for the tourism interests of Pelham, and who does not have an economic development office?
Yeah, I think, and I'll ask Tim to add to it, but at the RTO, we will have representation on that new tourism organization through the Economic Development Corporation.
Just explain what it is.
What the RTO is?
Tourism.
Yeah. Government of Ontario's decided that they would like to have the funding go through one body for tourism in Ontario, in a region rather. So regional tourism organizations have been established. The Economic Development Corporation has one person, Guy Graveline, who sits on that board and represents the municipalities that aren't represented on the board, really the whole of the region. So the interests of Pelham and smaller municipalities would be represented by Guy.
Its purpose really is to coordinate tourism work.
Tourism marketing. The NEDC has a responsibility for tourism marketing as well. Tourism marketing to consumers is one that we're going to find ourselves doing less of and pushing that to the RTO. So the RTO is going to take bringing in tourists to the region as their primary objective, and we'll of course be pushing economic development initiatives, even if they involve attraction type, like a Great Wolf Lodge or some sort of theme park. Certainly we'll continue to do that as an NEDC.
Thank you. Question?
Thanks, John. I agree with Walter that, I appreciate the region for making themselves available for this kind of forum, and I encourage that we keep up this kind of more open approach. But at the same time, members of the people of the Niagara region have had virtually unbridled access to the Niagara region and to council meetings. One thing drawback with this night is there's no mandatory attendance for regional councillors. And I just wonder that, in the spirit of this so-called openness, is the region prepared to revisit and to repeal this nonsensical subsection of a recent bylaw that was passed in the small hours of the night after a excruciating, John, 4 or 5 hour in-camera session that now prohibits members from the public from being able to address council in the context of regional council, notwithstanding, of course, the exception for a 2/3 majority, and I consider that nonsensical as well. But the fact is, the public doesn't buy that council meetings need to be streamlined. If anything, your in-camera meetings need to be streamlined. We need to show more respect for the public who sits, as I have, waiting for in-camera meetings to end. Were it not for my access to a council meeting, Mr. Trojan, last spring, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to speak against a $1+ million proposed budget increase, which, as we saw tonight, was actually reduced to a negative increase. And I want to think that I helped contribute to convicting, with the courtesy of the cameras on and the public watching, council to take the right initiative and to reduce a $1+ million increase to negative. So I'm asking, will the region sharply revisit and repeal, I know that's going to be up to council, a motion that was unanimously passed by the last regional council, which bars us from attending. Other municipalities our size do not have these kind of laws on the books, so please don't cite Toronto or anything ridiculously large like that. We need to allow the public to have full access to regional council meetings again.
Thank you. Response? Peter?
And again, because I think, first of all, I think the region over the time I've been a member of regional council, which is since 1994, I believe has been very open and continues to be with the public. And I think a good example is this meeting we're having tonight, which is an example of making sure that we engage the public before we make decisions. However, it ultimately will be the council that makes the decisions. And this isn't something new. I look at Councillor Timms. He's been saying this for a long while, and at the budget we dealt with last year, I mean, that was raised by many councillors saying we need to engage the public more, and that's what we're doing. And I look at Commissioner Robson when he was moving forward with our Growth 31 plan. There was tremendous amount of public engagement with that before the final plan was put forward to council, and council debated it. I appreciate your concern, I really do, but council did take that position. It wasn't to keep people out, it was to try and improve how we dealt with business. The way the region works, it's mainly with standing committees. And anybody can go to a standing committee, and there you have the time to make your point, make your case, debate it, let the committee members debate it. They bring it back to council, and generally council will go along with those issues. And there are exceptions. I mean, there are major issues that come across, and I would believe that in those cases, council would permit a delegation from the public. But over the course I've been the chair, I mean, we used to wonder. I mean, we start a meeting at 6:30, and so we would look at the number of delegations, the number of presentations. We're saying, look, we've got to put a limit on this. And so we would either defer people to 1, 2, or 3 meetings, or say you can't. But we will always be open. But the answer is that this is an issue that you raised. I know there are other councillors that are concerned about making sure that we do what's right for the public. And I'm certain that there will be one or more than one councillors who will be bringing this up so the new council can determine whether it should be reversed or not. And that's what democracy is about. I mean, you make a decision, somebody else can change it if they want, but certainly I can say from the point of view of this council, under no circumstances do we do anything with an intent to keep the public from having an input into what we do. Our job is to represent the best interests of the public, and that's what we do. If we don't do it, then the public can deal with us at the next election. But I'm confident we've acted appropriately. Thank you.
Just a small supplement.
With all due respect, though, Chair Partington, it's very difficult for, let's say, for example, a single mother who's working at a 9-to-5 job to get time off to speak to something like a budget issue. So I know that there's still the exception clause. Let's just take away this bridled access, and let's do the right thing, and let's just manage our council meetings a little bit more efficiently on the in-camera side, etc. Thank you.
Another question from the gallery? Let me just see some hands. Who still has questions? Yeah, I realize that. Oh, okay. Let's go here first, and then we'll come back.
Dan Forche from Welland. I'm looking at the taxation affordability strategy, and I'm very impressed with the numbers that are presented here. But my question, and ultimately, is with new revenue sources and new expenditures and all this stuff that's coming through your budget process, how have you maintained to keep it as low, number one? Number two, are you compromising services? Are you compromising reserves? And what are your net expenditure increases over that period of time?
A lot of questions in there. First of all, how have we been able to keep it at that low level? Number one, I think you've asked, has service deteriorated or diminished as a result of that? One of the objectives of the affordability strategy was to prevent that from happening. So we at staff have been influenced by the affordability strategy to try to become more efficient, and are constantly looking at ways that we can do that. Because inflation is running higher than those increases, and wage settlements, especially arbitrated settlements, are running higher than those increases. So it forces that innovation and greater efficiency. I did mention as well the fact that the rates, those increases, are as low as they are, in part due to the fact that the province is removing certain social costs from the property tax bill. So that has provided some relief, because one of the objectives of the strategy is over time, it can't happen easily overnight, but over time, if the increases are less than income growth, it lightens the load, it lightens the burden on property taxpayers. We still have a number of years to run with those costs being assumed by the province and removed from the property tax bill. So to the extent that that's going to take place, it'll allow us some relief. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not total relief by reduction in the tax burden. Some of that relief is transferred to address the infrastructure gap in our capital budget, because we have a huge gap to meet our responsibilities for roads and bridges and water and sewer facilities.
Still don't, are you going to be able to provide the public the actual increase in expenditures over the last 5 years?
Yeah, and that was, I mean, largely debated during the last couple of rounds of budget discussions. We present the budget. These are the sort of the bottom line after taking everything into account. The level of spending is higher than that, and in fact is higher than inflation, because at the same time that some of those costs are being removed from our budget responsibilities, we also have increased demand. For example, a 32% increase in social assistance caseloads over the last 2-year period. So that has to be accommodated as well.
Here's a question from a student from Brock, and this is a question that we haven't asked yet tonight. We know that we live in a region of fairly low per capita income. We have some people who are really struggling, and here's Megan's question. What's the region doing to improve social services to help citizens?
That is a great question. I would say the main initiative right now is the Niagara Prosperity Initiatives Project that Council instituted 3 years ago now. They took $1.5 million of some of the upload savings and allocated it specifically to that piece. That's being managed by the Business Education Council and through a board of individuals of which the region has a representative, as well as businesses and other community partners. They make decisions on where to allocate some of those dollars to address prosperity and poverty within our neighborhoods. One of the projects that came out of that was a neighborhood mapping project to try and identify the neighborhoods most at risk and the children most at risk. So there's 7 neighborhoods that we are currently focusing on for that piece.
All right, another question? I think you've had one back here. No? You've had it answered. Anyone else? Come on. Here we go.
Yvon Doucette again. What are the waiting times for affordable housing? I know that in Port Colborne they're indicating 6 to 8 years before being able to get affordable housing. And I know for a fact that according to the Prosperity Project, which we're involved in, there's a certain section of Port Colborne that has an extreme need for affordable housing. Now, is the waiting list the same? Is the waiting times, I should say, the same everywhere else within the region? Or is Port Colborne very deficient in affordable housing?
To answer your question in terms of wait times, they are posted on our website, so if you did want more detail. It varies from municipality to municipality, and it also varies in terms of the selections that people make. So a person who comes in and says they want one specific building will wait longer. But if a person comes in and makes multiple selections, that wait time is reduced. The demand rate now for affordable housing, we have almost 10,000 people on our waiting list, and that's increasing daily. And we're not able to offset that in terms of new development quickly enough. At this point in time, we're involved in a $21 million program to bring on new units, but it's just a drop in the bucket. I'm not sure that fully answers your question, but in terms of Port Colborne specifically, we do have housing there. We have affordable housing in all the municipalities, and it's a question then of turnover in each municipality in terms of letting someone go in from the waiting list. Mm-hmm.
If there is an extreme need in Port Colborne, I understand we have housing, and I know exactly where it is, and that's not a problem. It's sitting in my ward, and that's fine, okay? But we need so much more because everyone tells us we have a critical need in Port Colborne for this, okay? Now, I'm sure other communities can probably say the same or similar, but if the waiting list is 7 to 8 years, okay, by the time the individual gets it, they may not need it anymore, and at the time they requested it was a critical need. So we're losing out somehow in being able to support our citizens that are vulnerable. And that's something I think the region, as well as Port Colborne, has to address. And that's something that I'm sure we're trying to address through the Prosperity Project. But what is the region? Does the region have plans on developing more of these affordable housing units in the South End?
Thank you.
Oh, 2 things that I'd like to respond to. One is in terms of the development programs. To date, the programs that we've used have been funded specifically by the federal and provincial government, and we wait on their lead in terms of when the next program comes. We have done development in Port Colborne under those programs. In terms of where we target, and I think that's part of your question, although you didn't use the target word, what happens is we release a request for proposals when we get that program announcement from the federal and provincial government. At that point in time, we go through the proposals. So if we don't get a proposal from a municipality, then, you know, and I do totally agree with what you said. I mean, this is a partnership, and it's a partnership between the region and Port Colborne in this particular instance to do this sort of programming and making development happen. One thing I should mention, though, is we have another program. It's a rent supplement program, and we go to private landlords, and we go to them and ask them if they can give us some of their units, and then we subsidize those units. And we do have some of those as well in Port Colborne.
Thank you. Here's a question that many people are asking. It's not so much a budget question, but a political question. What's the process for electing a new chair? Mike, maybe, do you want to take that?
Yeah. Okay. You're right. There has been an awful lot of interest in the process for the election of the regional chair. We have what we call a procedural bylaw that spells out the process and consistent with past practice and consistent with that bylaw. The selection of the regional chair within Niagara is one by which the decision is made and the selection is made from within or by the existing regional council. There's been some discussion as well about the eligibility for those that wish to run for regional council. Legislatively, there is not a restriction on those other than duly elected regional councillors to be nominated for the position of regional chair. So the process, as it's outlined in that bylaw, will take place on December the 9th. The nomination process will take place at that meeting, where any candidate that has an interest in it, who has a mover and a seconder, can be nominated for that position, and then council, after being sworn in at that meeting, go through an election process and will select the regional chair. I don't know, Peter, if you want to add anything to that?
What I want to add to that, because there has been some articles in the paper, and I think one thing I just want to clarify is the fact that whether the chair is elected from a regional council, as it is now and has to be for this election, or whether the chair is elected at large by the vote of all the municipalities, that's something that, along with any other issues of governance, the next council may choose to deal with. But the fact is, if you change the way that you're electing a regional person as a chair from the way we do it now to at large, that requires the provincial amendment to the Ontario Municipal Act. So it has to be done through the province. It can't be done now. So, and that's a completely different issue, but sometimes it does get mixed up with the current process.
Thank you. Here's a question from Wayne Fleet. Why are we spending money on a culture plan, Patrick? Isn't that better for a grade 10 project?
It's unfortunate that someone had that view, quite frankly, because a couple of things. As I mentioned before, this is something that was identified in Council's business plan. People might be surprised to know that our culture sector, it's estimated, provides for up to 9% of the employment in this peninsula, and as a result of that, in an economy and in transition, we have this sector that, as it turns out, is perhaps not, indeed is not as well coordinated as it could be for economic benefit. So the culture plan is not simply a matter of celebrating what is otherwise a very robust culture base. It's also about taking advantage and capitalizing that asset for the resident and visitor. And we're also talking about real economy. So we take the culture plan actually quite seriously. It is not simply a nicety. It is, in fact, part of something you raised earlier. Was a question earlier about sustainability. It's about capitalizing on your existing assets for your economy for today and for the future.
Questions? Anyone? Okay, one more, Andy, and that's it.
Team one. Thanks. Andy Petrosi, St. Catharines. I wonder if I could direct this to Chair Partington. First of all, Chair Partington, I want to thank you for your leadership at the helm of Niagara region over the last 2 terms. And I just wonder if you could respond to this. It would be an understatement if anybody in Niagara would say we aren't over-governed in Niagara region. We have some 119 politicians. If this was Toronto, someone said we'd have over 700. I wonder if you could speak, looking back in your rearview mirror and forward in the windshield, whether or not you think that there is an appetite and interest, perhaps even at the council level, to streamline council. Mr. Andres, our departed friend, talked about getting rid of the 12 mayors. I know that alone would save the taxpayer $1 million. And also, isn't it time we looked at at least some headway in amalgamations with the smaller communities and larger communities? You could speak to that, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. The question, are we over-governed in Niagara? Interestingly, when the regional municipality of Niagara was brought into existence in 1970, there were twice as many municipalities in existence then as there are now. There were 26. The County of Welland, the County of Lincoln, and then the various townships and towns and cities that then existed. And so we have made significant changes then. Right now, there's lots of talk, for example, about representation. We got too many people in regional council. Well, and representation, we don't have representation by population that is up there. The fact is that when Niagara came into existence, there were 12 municipalities, the current ones we have now. And the government of the day decided to have the mayor of each of those municipalities sit on regional council. And so the mayor of Waynfleet, with what might have then been about 4,000 population, I don't know, it's over 6 now, but the fact is the mayor of Waynfleet got 1 seat on council. The mayor of the city of St. Catharines, with a population now of 134,000, has 1 seat on council. And and so the interesting thing is, I don't think, not taking the mayors off council, but if you set the mayors aside, there's probably reasonable representation across the region. I haven't noticed any unfair biases, any unfair conduct by anyone. I mean, the interesting thing about regional government, we're talking about water and wastewater. We're spending about $100 million this year on water and wastewater. Nobody sees it, but drive down the Queenie at Grimsby and you see our wastewater treatment plant. There's a major plant going into Niagara Falls, $25 million. There's a major plant in the south end in Port Colborne. I mean, all that stuff's happening because we all work together. That's that one voice agenda I talk about, and I won't go on much longer. I was in Belfast about a month ago. Belfast has 500,000 people. They got 400 elected representatives in that greater area. Is there too many? Yes. What do I believe? I don't believe in one city. I don't believe bigger is necessarily better, but I think you could get down to somewhere between 6 and 8. I've said that for a long time. I still say it. People think I believe in one city from a headline that was in the Standard last week. So maybe I can use this as an opportunity to say I do not believe in one city of Niagara. Now, do I believe we can make some changes? Yes, I do. And I think this next council's talked about it. Is there an appetite for it? I was the chair of the governance committee about 15 or 16 years ago. Everybody was going to change. They're afraid the province was going to introduce it. But guess what happened? After about 1.5 years of talk, nobody did anything once the pressure was on. And so all I would say to the next council, if you're going to go down that path, please be committed to do something. Do something about water and wastewater first. That'll save $10 to $15 million a year. So anyway, those are my comments.
Can you explain to the public the mechanics of that to happen?
Well, again, I mean, I'm being signaled here, but I think if you got down to 6 to 8, you could reduce the council size at Niagara, and you'd reduce the numbers in the region. But everybody may not agree with that, and that's going to be the issue.
And this guy's retiring. He's still got passion after all the years. Here's another question from Niagara Falls. How do you plan to improve regional roads, bridges, and water and sewer while dealing with regional debt? Would you consider cutting police costs or regional transit?
Who wants to take that?
I can start for the first part, if Mike,
Sure.
if you want, and I think others may want to chime in. One of the things that we're looking at actually has to do with, as part of our overall growth strategy, and making sure that we're capitalizing to the greatest degree possible on existing services, is when new services are being required, that new development pays for them. That is something that has been quite deficient and historically has created a significant gap. So as we're working through the early part of the next term, we'll be focusing on development charges and making sure that when it comes to that which is effectively taxing, that new development is not actually being subsidized by the existing tax base, and at the same time making sure that our infrastructure work is tied in a predictable way to, in fact, how we do pay for it from a development charge standpoint. I'm not sure if Mr. Trojan or my colleague Commissioner Brothers may want to speak to it as well.
Ken?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. We've got probably in the order of $1.2 billion of public works capital investments over the next 10 years. A large portion of this is growth-related. A large portion of this is infrastructure sustainability. In other words, keeping the lights on, moving forward. This really is going to take a balance of looking at, in the council decision, looking at how much you want to invest in your road network. We're already seeing some of the bridge deterioration, and we're going to need some help building some of our new bridges. We have 123 bridges throughout the Niagara region. They're in reasonable shape, but over time, 50, 60 years of life, these structures tend to deteriorate. This new term of council, we'll be talking about the asset condition, what our road network is like, what the sustainability of our water and wastewater networks are like. We'll talk about the rates required to sustain these investments. We'll talk about the condition and where you want to spend money for either growth-related aspects or paving programs that we'll bring forward for your consideration. Now, there is an infrastructure gap, so we've got some tough decisions, frankly, around the corner. The infrastructure gap we're talking about over 10 years is $450 million, but if you look at it on an annual basis, there's $20 or $30 million are pretty tough choices that council will be faced with. Now, what we'll try to do with staff is to package this thing up and talk about what needs to be done, what road conditions are, where you wish to make investments that would perhaps leverage economic development, where council wishes to focus, following Commissioner Robson's comments. But make no mistake, our staff are very committed on getting it done and maintaining the systems we have. But at some point, we will be needing to make further investments in certain areas, and it's our job to really bring forward, the balance information that council needs, talking about the condition that it's in, what it's going to take to sustain those assets, what the appropriate balance of who should pay, developers, the taxpayer, leveraging as much as we can at the federal, provincial level to assist us is very important.
Thank you. All right, we've run out of time for questions, but if you have questions beyond tonight, send them to the region. You know regional councillors, send them to Mr. Partington. They want to keep this discussion going. I want to take a couple of minutes now. If you could look at the forms that you saw when you came in. The region would like to hear from you. If you could look at those points and pick the top two of how to better communicate with you, not only on the budget, but all regional items. Take just a minute, and then I'll come back to you in a minute or two. If you could do that, that would be wonderful. If I could get your attention again, I know we're kind of rushing this portion, but we do have some time restrictions. Can I hear from anyone, when you look at those four items, what's the most important one? Let me see someone who's willing to offer an opinion. Anyone? Thank you. Is that your hands up? Right?
Yeah, it is. basically, number one, briefing sessions in municipalities throughout the region.
More briefing.
Yeah, that's, and if it has to be done by our Treasury Department at our local level, that is great. I mean, they probably have equally as much information as the councillors, or as the regional corporate staff, right?
Very good. Anyone else? Let me just come over there so we can hear you.
I think number 4 is more important because the way I read this, if I understand it correctly, number 4 would provide for more back and forth between the public and the council.
Can you just read it?
Special meetings where members of the public can present their ideas on the budget for council's consideration at committee meetings. I think the public's opinion, I think the briefing sessions are important, but I think the public's opinion would go further with that type of structure.
Thank you. Good idea. All right. Anyone who has submitted a question online or Twitter, the staff of the region will get back to you, provided they have your email address, and certainly anyone in the room, if you have questions, as I said earlier, send them in. They want to hear from you. I want to thank you from my perspective as a private citizen coming out tonight. It's been a privilege for me to help tonight, and now I'd like to turn it over to Mike to close out the evening.
Thanks, John. Just to refer you back to the information that's on the slide, this shows all of those opportunities for the public to have input into the budget process here at the region. It includes sort of the traditional history, the dates that are used for our Budget Review Committee to deliberate, and it also shows the additional opportunities that we're creating as a result of this kind of a forum. So we appreciate the feedback that we got tonight. We'll attempt to use that and package it. As I mentioned, we'll be preparing a report to council so that information is part of their budget-making deliberations. As I mentioned, we'll have another session similar to this in January once we have a draft budget. So there'll be another opportunity for input at that time. And based on the responses that we get to the survey information that we have tonight, or the questions, we'll try to cater these sessions in the future to best meet the needs of the public, to have those added opportunities for input. So I just wanted to thank everyone here for attending tonight, both in person, those that are online. I want to thank all of the staff, again, who've been here tonight to assist in answering any of the questions that came up, and as well all of the technical folks who made this possible so that we were able to do it both here in person and live. And just to remind everyone, it's being taped by Cogeco, so that the program will be played, I think, 3 times over the next 1 or 2 week period. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, and thank you, John, for moderating tonight.
We're done. Good night back. Good work, John. Thank you.